World War II from the Soviet point of view. The first title that rhymes. This video will be biased. That is the point of this video. Do not complain about it in the comment section. If you watch this, you're consenting to hearing a very biased, but factually correct, telling of World War II. It's not easy to determine what counts as World War II. I could, of course, start in 1939 with the invasion of Poland, but I would be missing out many important things. So, we're starting in World War I. As you know, in 1917 the Soviet Union was founded and immediately attacked by capitalist forces in Russia and troops from France, the UK, the US and Japan. Amazingly, the Soviets won, though they had inherited a pretty bad country. Millions had died and the economy basically didn't exist. Most people were uneducated peasants who couldn't even read. The two things the USSR had were people and land. So the Soviet government went about modernizing the economy to increase the standards of living by building factories and increasing the productivity of farmers. As time went on, the Soviet economy was growing very quickly. So every year they got closer to being a superpower. This graph shows you that they got very wealthy very quickly. And because of the abundance of workers and natural resources, the Soviet leadership knew that as time went on, they would surpass other nations which have fewer workers and fewer natural resources. The richest country in the world and arguably the superpower at the time was Germany, because of the wealth that was generated by the workers in the mines and factories in the Rhineland. Of course, in 1933 the Nazis got into power and dissolved the parliament to protect the interests of German industrialists in the face of a potential socialist revolution. From this point on, Stalin and the Soviet leadership knew that there would be a war with Germany. The fascists consistently blamed Bolshevism for everything going wrong in the world, and they ranted about how they would rid the world of socialism. To achieve this, they allied with the capitalist industrialists and suppressed unions, and prominent leftists were sent to concentration camps. Because of this, fascism is seen as a variant of capitalism by leftists. Fascism is an attempt of the capitalist ruling class to survive against the popular socialist revolution and to destroy all socialism using any measure necessary. I have a video that explains this further. Because of this, it was clear to everyone that a war would break out between the fascists and the Soviets. So the Soviets needed to buy time. They knew that by 1943 they would be able to defeat Germany. So it was crucial that they are not attacked before that. The German fascists faced a similar problem. They wanted to spread fascism to all nations to create a larger alliance to defeat the might of the Soviet Union. For this, they needed to conquer other capitalist states. They assumed they could defeat France and they thought they could defeat the British, but they knew they would lose against the Soviets if they attacked while the armies were committing war crimes in France. So the plan was to make peace with the Soviets, then turn on France and the UK, after which they would throw the entire weight of their army and the armies of the other capitalist nations against the Soviet Union. Note that, despite both being capitalists, the Western Allies and Germany were enemies. The reason is that they were different kinds of capitalists. Hitler's capitalism was all about the state controlling the population to avoid a socialist uprising, while the Western Allies were a lot more friendly to individual rights, like democracy and so on. Sure, bourgeois democracy, but I would prefer living in the UK over Nazi Germany any day. The Nazis made an offer to the Soviets. They would partition Poland, giving the USSR land it had lost after World War I, and giving Germany land it had lost after World War I. And in return, there would be peace between the two nations. People use this event to say that fascism and communism are the same, but this is not true. The reason the USSR accepted the deal was obviously because they were not ready for a war, not because they wanted to be imperialist or friends with fascists. The fascists swore to destroy the Soviet Union. Of course, nobody in the Kremlin was stupid enough to trust Hitler. There is a reason why they had millions of men on the German border. If you ever played Hearts of Iron, you know in 1939 the USSR has no chance against Germany. But in 1943 that's different. Of course it's a video game, but if you look at the production numbers, for example, tanks during World War II, you see that Germany initially outproduced the Soviets, especially in medium rather than light tanks. But by the end of the war, Soviet production was 4 times the German one. Same is true if you look at army sizes. The Germans initially led, but by the end of the war, the Soviets had 4 times the army. So they were not ready for the invasion because the economy was not there yet. Not because Stalin was a naive idiot who trusted Hitler not to invade. There's a 99% chance Stalin knew that there would be a war, and he took steps to make sure it happened as late as possible to get the greatest possible advantage. Of course, the Germans also knew that the Soviet Union would soon overpower them. So in the summer of 1941, Operation Barbarossa was a go. Fascists, hordes, who were experienced from the previous plunderings of Poland, the Benelux states and France, swarmed the Soviet border like a swarm of locusts feasting on the grain in Ukraine in 1932. The Soviet army was not yet in a condition to stop them. The capitalist/fascist forces burned and looted everything they could find, and they committed unspeakable atrocities against the population, as well as executing Soviet prisoners for being party members, which is a war crime. But talking about the crimes of the capitalist forces is not the point of this video. They were shit, we all know. The fascists thought that they wouldn't need a long campaign to defeat Russia. The German strategy was called Blitzkrieg, lightning war, and it was all about breaking through the enemy lines, taking the capital and forcing a quick surrender. Essentially a Zurich rush. I wonder how many will get that joke. The Nazis assumed that a quick campaign would defeat the USSR. They thought it would be like in World War I, where they only advanced a few hundred kilometers and Russia fell into a civil war. Hitler said, all we have to do is kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will fall apart. A naive assumption of the fascists and a grave mistake. They underestimated the determination of the Soviet people. The Red Army, while losing thousands to encirclements, still managed to slow down the German advance until winter. The Soviet Union signed a pact of neutrality with Japan to be able to move specialized winter fighting troops from Siberia to the defense of the heartland. These troops were completely adapted to winter warfare, while the Germans were freezing to death. Germany was quickly running out of oil, so by the beginning of spring, when the advance continued, they now focused on the oil fields in the Caucasus, instead of the political centers in Moscow and Leningrad. They basically had to give up on their tried and tested tactics and revert to a long war of attrition, which, because of the massive Soviet industry and population, they could not win. The Red Army didn't predict that the capitalists would go for the south, so they were deployed in the wrong place, allowing the Germans to advance far beyond the supply lines. They even reached the Volga and a city, now called Volgograd, then known as Stalingrad. The Red Army determined that Stalingrad would not fall, and Hitler said that Stalingrad will fall no matter what. So both parties were determined to win this battle. Now it was all down to the capability and determination of the soldiers. Contrary to what propaganda will tell you, the Russians didn't throw people at machine gun fire. All soldiers were trained and well equipped to give them the best possible advantage in fighting the forces of capital. Some people think that to stop people from retreating, the KGB shot soldiers in the back, which is a complete lie made up by capitalist propagandists for Hollywood movies. The no-step-back order was to stop officers from retreating from their position against their orders. The ordinary soldier was perfectly allowed to return to their lines if an attack failed. Shooting your own men is so obviously a bad idea that I'm amazed that people actually believe that that happened. Stalingrad. Both sides quickly sent in more and more men, and neither side could win. But then winter came, and the battle kept on going. And by February of 43, both sides had over 1 million men in the cities. The Soviets now had more artillery and twice the aircraft of the Germans. That is when they counterattacked. They encircled the city, cutting the Germans off from supply lines. They tried to supply via the air, but the Soviets controlled the sky, so German resistance fell at last. Fun fact, my great-grandpa died in Stalingrad. But he was a Nazi, so it's whatever. By the end of 43, and thanks to the determination of the Soviet soldiers, the front line had moved back towards Germany. This is where my favorite German phrase was coined. Taktische Frontlinienverkürzungen, meaning tactical operation for shortening of the front line, which is how you say retreat without admitting defeat. Also in 43, there was the largest tank battle ever at Kursk. Both sides threw everything at it. The Soviet Union was completely superior at this point, and had 3 times the soldiers and 2 times the tanks. Predictably, the fascists lost this battle, and in 1944 they had lost all of Eastern Europe to the USSR and lost Western Europe and Italy to the capitalist allies. About time they showed up. And of course, once the Red Army entered Berlin, Hitler took the coward's way out and shot himself, instead of answering for his crimes. And soon the 3 main generals of the Wehrmacht formally surrendered to the Allied nations. Fun fact, the German government technically never surrendered, only the Wehrmacht did. Nobody cares about this, besides some nutjobs who declare their living room the Fourth Reich. The war in Asia lasted a few more weeks before the Soviet Union crossed the border of Manchuria, and they got halfway through Korea before Japan was able to surrender, after being nuked by the capitalist West, twice. The Soviets returned Manchuria to their fellow communists in the Chinese Civil War, and let Japan be occupied by the Allies. The post-war borders were already agreed on by the Yalta Conference. The USSR got the largest area because they did by far the most fighting and dying. The Allies quickly turned into rivals. Of course, to defeat fascism and avoid the revolution being destroyed, the USSR worked with the liberal capitalist West. But once the fascists were gone, they turned on each other, because capitalism and socialism cannot coexist peacefully. Western Europe was under the capitalist occupation facilitated by the Marshall Plan, which was used by the CIA to hide agents to make sure only capitalists would take power. The original idea was that the different occupation zones in Germany would reunite in the future. Stalin actually offered an unarmed, united, democratic Germany under international supervision. But in Germany, socialism was really popular, and the Allies were scared to lose an election to socialists, so they declined, which is not how democracy works. Then the Allies turned on the USSR and established a capitalist West German Republic. So, a few months later, when it became clear that there would be no peaceful unification, the Soviets did the same thing and established a socialist East Germany, since having that zone be occupied by the USSR forever was a bad solution. The same happened to Korea and Vietnam, but I have a separate video on those. In the countries the Soviets had liberated, there was a general pro-communist feeling, because the Soviets had just defeated the fascists, so most concluded that the Soviets were the good guys. And in all Eastern European governments, the majority of the parties were communist of some sort. The only issue was that they had so many different parties that didn't cooperate. So Soviet officials were used to negotiate cooperation between the parties, and they would be unified. That's why the East German ruling party was called Socialist Unity Party. It was one party that was made by uniting many different ones. After unity had been achieved, the parties were usually in charge, and they would then ban capitalist parties to secure the rule of the people. They then naturally aligned with the USSR, and after the West created NATO, they formed the defensive Warsaw Pact, as well as Comecon to facilitate trade and cooperation. Then the Soviet Union developed its own nuclear weapons using the help of well-intentioned spies, and this is where the Cold War starts and this video ends. This video was recorded the week before I started rehab, so sorry if you donated and aren't in the outro. Thanks to Conrad Asshole, Darius the Bird, Eric Betts, Attila Nemetz, Bryn Floss, Carissa, German Pineapple, Daniel Hyman, Daphne, Dr. Grimm, Emily Marigold Klassen, Gabi Gita, Herdington Gerdington, Josh C., Joshua Clark, Klastrup, Masijay Rojek, Nana Epema, Neil Banderi, Ollie, Pote, Raymond DeVille, Romain Briot, Sean Murphy, Stairmaster Chef, Stephen and Trey.